Good. Well, welcome. And welcome to everyone we're actually doing this live on Instagram, which is, causes heart palpitations in people over the age of 70. So hopefully
it could be fatal.
This could be an interesting
online
exit. Online exits. So, but we are so appreciative. Of you being here. So welcome.
Thank you.
And the topic that we wanted to talk about in this studio talk is, how to maintain a healthy practice. And it's something that we've thought a lot about, especially as we age and especially as we've gone through things in our lives that have challenged the practice. And being able to tease it apart a little bit and think about what we mean by what is a healthy practice and what we mean by, practice is a place to start in examining all of this.
Yeah, and healthy.
Yeah.
Yes. Sometimes even when you're really sick, you can have a healthy practice.
It's true. It's true.
And in fact, because the body always goes through either major or minor, problems that seem to keep increasing. You can still have a healthy practice.
Yeah.
Okay. In other words, the yoga can really be wonderful and beneficial.
Yeah. And so the key is really looking at how to find that beneficial impact for each of us as we maintain our practice. And one way of looking at it is that, we are all drawn to this practice for different reasons. And it's almost as if some sort of door opens at one point in our lives. And, we fuddle around and find our way through this door that turns out to be yoga. And for many of us, it is asana that sucks us in to the practice, especially in modern yoga. That's one of the things that really pulls people in the door. But there's also, some people are attracted to the meditation, some to the pranayama, to the chanting, to the philosophy, and those are obviously all parts of the practice. And usually we're drawn in because of something that is inexplicable, that resonates with us when we have the experience of, say, a first asana class. And something happens and, angels sound and, or you just have this ethereal experience. Or it happens in chanting or meditation, or, you read something profound in a philosophy class.
And you go, aha, yeah. I get that. And then you can't
ever remember what it was.
But it was something really, really tasty right there.
And so what we realize as we practice yoga over a period of time is that all of these doorways are leading really to the same place, which is they're leading to a place where we start to have insight into the meaning of reality, and more importantly, really insight into our relationships in the world, our relationships to other people, and to ourselves, as whatever that means. And like with any kind of relationship, like, our relationship or our relationship with friends or with nature, there's a tendency sometimes to sort of get stuck in mind with the first taste of that relationship, the first, sort of thing that made you realize, oh, I'm gonna explore more about that relationship, whether it's with asana or with another person. And then to codify the vision of what it is that that relationship means. And this happens in human relationships, like, thinking back to when we first met, if, if we can remember that far back. But, the tendency sometimes in relationships is to think, this is who the person is, my first picture of them, and then not let that evolve as that person evolves, as you yourself evolve. And if you don't let it evolve, it isn't healthy,
Right, because, you're not actually looking at the person anymore. And you're just looking at an idea, which is this code, some language. We're like, oh, that's so-and-so. And we do that all the time. We have a flash where we think, oh, this is wonderful, and then we label it. And then we think, oh, that the name, the code, name is too linguistic, but the code for it is the thing. And we then embody that literally in our prana patterns, and then we carry on from there. And it's kind of like we've trapped, and we do that to ourselves, and we do it to others.
And the most unpleasant part of that is that whatever it is that we're engaging with, there can be no sort of evolution. It has to stay stuck in order to support the idea of what we see it as being. And it starts to be confining rather than something that is liberating or something that is inspiring, which is, in terms of yoga, that's what draws most of us in. Is it something that we have a flash of inspiration through, or a flash of, sort of opening through? And so if we do that with our asana, which is one of the ways people do it, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But if we do that with any of these practices, meditation, chanting, etc., pranayama, then it's like you're in a big house with lots of different rooms of these different forms of practice. And you've just decided, this is as far as I'm going. This door took me into this room. And that's as far as I'm going to go. And I'm locking the door so nothing interrupts it.
Don't want to lose it. It's because it's so valuable. And I understand that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
I know. Me too. But ultimately, when you lock yourself in that room, the room gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And the whole idea of it being part of something that is really leading to a place of growth and insight starts to sort of fade away. So what we want to do in this particular talk is to talk a little bit about some of the relationships of how one gets into the yoga itself. And then also, so we'll talk about asana in a minute, but it's really important when we start reflecting back on our own practice to think about, well, how is practice spoken of in some of the texts that are there for us to look at, that are the yoga texts, that can really give us some support in, enriching the practice and practices that we evolve to. And it's mentioned in many places, in the Yoga Sutra, in the Bhagavad Gita.
And Hatha Pradipika, all of the, and then I'm just thinking that in the Ashtanga system, which is and we think, oh, what is the system? That's another whole field right there. What do you mean? That the actual traditions are, say, in the Yogatarvali, which is delightfully condensed and potent. Oh, I'm revealing my, or the aparoksha anubhuti, which is, I think, should be required reading for, because that deals with, we always think, oh, I'm part of the Ashtanga, or the 8 limbs, which is wonderful, and that's, Buddhism also has 8 limbs, but part of the tradition is then to convert on a certain bit to 15-limbed yoga. 8 aren't quite doing it for me, so I gotta add
7 more.
Yeah, it's 7 more. You think it was tough before, but then the 7 somehow melt beautifully back, and so we have a little meditation we're going to do.
Yeah, and there's some, in the Yoga Sutra, and I'm thinking of the main 2 verses that many of us remember from that in terms of asana, are that, asana, that you practice it consistently over a long period of time, right? So it's not that you just come and go with it, or start it and stop it and start it and stop it, but that you practice it consistently. And that doesn't mean obsessively, which some of us who tend to be obsessive are eager to translate that as meaning. So it doesn't mean you have to be obsessive about it, but there's a consistency, which in a way is like the idea within the Buddhist system of there being, effort and integrity and intention in what we do, that we are consistent.
Yeah, we're consistent, and we keep coming back to looking again at it. And so it's funny that one of the yoga asana has to be sthira and sukha, and and yet a lot of practitioners, including myself, occasionally we grit our teeth, which is usually a sign that it's not sthira, or it's definitely not sukha, which means happy or beautiful, and yet we make that an object, and I have to get there, so I'm going to grit my teeth and just breathe harder and maybe growl as I'm practicing. And just because I want to have it so sukha. And so we've taken a photo of sukha and placed it on the wall, and we've stopped looking at it. We've stopped feeling what's actually going on, which is kind of the problem. And so that's actually advanced, just to make it stable, which means connected to earth, or balanced. And that means ultimately connected to the practical situation around you, and so it's grounded, and it's open and happy and wonderful. And then the mind can, then what happens then is you're doing this asana, which requires doing things, but then the sense of effort, it just becomes, it's actually, even if it's fancy, it doesn't require that much effort if you're paying attention. And so the sense of effort goes away, and you go into these moments where you're absorbed in the asana itself, or by asana I mean by the prana, by the sensations involved, And even the thoughts that are arising are just like infinite. You just go, wow, that's amazing. And and it's just like in practice, even if you have a neurotic thought, I read
You
about.
talking to me?
No,
You looked
I
right
was,
at me when you
I was
said
like,
that.
looking in the mirror.
Yeah.
That the neurotic thought itself, is like amazing. If you actually just look at it. And so all of these things that are considered to be divine in the sense of like, wow, pay attention to that. It's really much more amazing than you think it is.
And so that's really what we're talking about as the idea of, something draws you in, for many of us, asana. And then as you really go deeply into that, rather than codifying it, rather than staying on the surface of whatever the practice is, as you start to, and we kind of prefer the word, as you take refuge in the practice, we prefer refuge rather than sort of surrender to it and flail around on the floor, but more that you really find a space of meaning and a space of safety and a space of, nourishment, which is what refuge, when you are lost in the desert and you come upon a little hut and someone says, please come take refuge in here. It's a place where you become whole again.
Yeah. So it's a practical, and can vary from, but it's like finding a nice stable tree, and sometimes, and I'm just thinking of the tragedy of earthquake that just happened in Myanmar. So it's like, even when the ground itself is shaking, it's like, oh, those things you normally would take refuge in,
Yeah.
you can't.
And so then you go deeper. And that's what we're talking about is, yes, you come back to the stability that you have sort of ingrained in your nervous system, let's say through asana or pranayama, chanting. So there's some sort of stability with the consistency, just like the neurons are firing and the patterns are in your system, and the body kind of has a familiar territory that feels safe. And in that space, you then have the capacity to look out and to, find what it is you're going to do to interface with the world. So in terms of the earthquake idea, that's what happens. You get stable and then you interface. With our own practice, this consistency is what makes it, really become part of our lives. And we have this saying we often offer that Richard came up with many, many, many years ago of, that yoga ruins your life. And that's what we mean by the phrase, is that at first you just think, hey, I'm just going to go to the gym and get strong arms and more presentable buttocks. And before you know it, you're getting up at 4 a.m. in order to practice, and you're going to bed at early hours and missing all the fun with your friends, and you are
Your friends
think you're weird again, weirder than they thought you were, and yet that you are feeling really nourished. And it's at that point that there's a great risk of sort of thinking of this as my practice, that is me, and I will take my practice, and in Ashtanga I will get my next pose, and I will, have, my achievements, And that's where it becomes a little bit off the rails, and where you stop being able to see, oh, well, what are these other forms of practice? I've now done a lot of asana. What is meditation? Is that helpful?
Well, that's the nice thing about the broader community, is there'll be other people. Oh, and a lot of them, you'll never find someone who's identical, which is probably good. And but there'll be, in a broader human community, there are people who just have different interests, and they have different methods of concentrating their minds. And so, even if they belong to the same religion as you, they do it differently. And you can, through communication with a broader community, you start to pick up, wow, maybe I should look again. And so it's really that, so we kind of retreat into our little shell of, oh, this makes me stable. And that's totally normal and natural as a living organism. And then we look out, once we're stable, we then look out and go, oh, and we can focus the mind. But then when you focus the mind, keep looking, and this is the essential thing in the teaching, you can, dharana, I focused my mind, wow. Applause from the universe, the gods are impressed. And there are a lot of people who focus their minds, and not always in very nice ways. And so the next stage is the dhyana. From dharana just means to hold it. And that could be all kinds of things. But then dhyana is when you start to actually look at it. So you're holding it, and you're looking at not only what you have defined as the practice, but you're looking at all of the emotion, everything to do with it, and you actually start to see, wow, there's much more to it. And then that is again an experience of a taste of the samadhi, or where you've let go. And so in that context, the samadhi is, even though we crave it because we read about it, it's a complete letting go. It's like, and it's a letting go of cultism, it's a letting go of even those things, the languaging that allowed you to focus the mind. And that's,
Yeah.
and that keeps the practice fresh, really.
Yeah, and my personal experience with the asana is that the tendency is that when you see this first, like my first experience with asana was reading, some old yoga books that probably no one even can, like Autobiography of a Yogi, years and years and years ago, and it's sort of like you read it in the corner because it was such a freaky, weird thing to be thinking about, and then going to a sort of general, you didn't want anyone to know you'd gone in that evil direction, and then you go to a sort of yoga class that was just kind of made you feel good, it made me feel good. And then years later is when I found Ashtanga yoga through you, and then finally we went to Mysore, and at that point there was this moment where yoga, asana, and some of the other parts of it, like the meditation, stopped being separate from my life. It became, it became something that was the nourishment for my life. And I started to see, I had done meditation, but I put that over there, and I'd done asana over there, and I'd, read some stuff, and I put that behind me, etc. And somehow, by immersing myself in the practice, and it doesn't need to be by going to India, it needs to be by really experiencing how these different types and forms of practice embellish one another, how the asana gets deeper when we finally settle down after our teenage years or whatever, our juvenile years, and start training the mind through meditation. And the asana does that in the Ashtanga system, I think, pretty effectively. But then it has its limits, and it becomes, it has the tendency sometimes, because of the way the Ashtanga system is set up, and you have, these series, and they become increasingly advanced, that it becomes like, where am I going, rather than where am I? Where am I going, and how high up on the rung of asana practitioners am I, rather than what is this remarkable thing, and how is it evolving, and what am I experiencing in the body, which is why I love that quote or the chant, which I'd love to chant it at the end, but maybe you could explain that Yang Mulan chant, because it's so much in Ashtanga comes back to Mulabandha.
Yeah, I don't know what the current is, but it was, but Patavi Joyce, and of course then it's Mulabandha, Mulabandha, Mulabandha. Just do Mulabandha, and of course easier said than done. It's actually a pretty easy word to say, but I was gratefully introduced to the aparoksha anubhuti, which is that if you're an Orthodox Ashtangi, this should be
part of your reading material.
Part of your reading for the first year. And it teaches Panchadashanga Yoga. And so it's a way of, even if you have subconscious disgust with Ashtanga Yoga, because you see that, it's merely an aggressive cult that in which I crave something. I want something, I want to climb to the top, and then if I get to the top, I want to go higher. And this is a traditional attitude of the demonic in both Hindu and Buddhist mythology and many other mythologies around the world. This is like
and it's a natural state of fusion for all of us, where you...
Yeah, and some of us do it a lot.
Yeah.
Like, I just want all beings to worship me. That's all. And I want to own the entire universe. And then I'll have all of you for dinner. And, I shouldn't have said that. But there's this wonderful verse, and some of you, I know you're looking it up right now, but it's verse 114 of the Aparokshanubhuti. And it's a real nice one, and I'll just Yanmula Sarvabhutanam. Yanmula, so mula, means root. Yanmula Sarvabhutanam, Yanmula Chittabandhanam. So that which is the root of all beings. So Bhutanam are beings. All beings. Human beings, all kinds of beings, all sentient beings. And start locally, but you use your imagination and to go, wow, that's a lot of beings. But that which is the root of all those beings, and that Yamula Sarvabhutanam, Yamula Chittabandhanam, and that which is that root, which is the Chittabandha, which which the mind is just completely stunned or absorbed into. And so you get Chittabandha, which of course you go, that's like Nirodha. which it is, that's what they're talking about. Oh, mula bandha, then they sada sevyo. Mula bandha should always be attended to. Seva is what you do when you try to, it's a devotional term to how can I serve others, because it's the root of all being. How can I perform seva? And so my practice, the point of my practice is that it is service for other beings. Occasionally, when I've given up my ambition to own the entire universe. Soon, hopefully I'll give that up. I'm not thinking of any politicians. And of course, then, but I'm doing it. I want to serve that which is mula bandha. So all of a sudden, mula bandha is a deity in a sense. It is the beloved. It is all beings. It is the root of all beings, which is this. Even if you're the essence of other beings, you become Ulabandha Sadasevyo Yogyaso Raja Yoginam, and that makes it the basis or the actual cause of what is called Raja Yoga, which is yoga well done. Yeah. And so once you do Raja Yoga, you don't become the Raja. Okay, and that's another
meaning
the
emperor, king.
Yeah, you don't become the king, except in the sense of the better understandings of the non-dual schools, in which you become that which is the beloved, which is all other beings, and so. But of course, the tendency of the ego says, "Oh, I'll practice Raja." I've actually known people years ago. He says, "I won't do yoga asana. I only do Raja Yoga," and they did have these. And one was a businessman.
Yeah,
I'll tell you where he's from.
Early on, sort of foreshadowing of modern yoga. But it's a natural tendency.
Yeah, the ego tendency is so natural. I mean, you can't live with it, and you can't live without it.
Yeah, and so the one of the things with our asana practice, and we'll go into that through this, is that in Ashtanga everyone's talking about cultivate mula bandha or squeeze your anus, whichever you can do, and that's how you improve your yoga. And if you can soften that definition into something like this chant from the Aparokshanabhuti, then you start realizing that not only finding this elusive asana practice of mula bandha becomes just absolutely intriguing, but finding out how to really serve through the practice becomes incredibly enticing as well. And so many people these days, suggest, let's do yoga off the mat. It's taking your yoga off the mat. And that's fine to think. And another way to look at it is that it already is off the mat, and that your ability to really interface with all of the different aspects of what yoga offers, which draw you into this room of relationship with the world, with others, that all of those things are already part of what you're doing. And that when the yoga becomes less mine, less my practice, and more something that is really offered as a gift to others, that then becomes a point at which the yoga just automatically kind of spills off the yoga mat. It spills off the mat into the world. And so we begin our practice, as all of us do, with, okay, I'm going to roll out my mat as a brand new practitioner, and I'm going to learn these practices and practice them consistently over a period of time until that moment where there's this merging, and where without effort, what we experience on the mat of this, unspeakable, glorious feeling, that little bits of it start coming out in our interfacing with others and in the way we perform our job, the way we cook our food, the way, we just walk down the street. And that starts to feed back into the asana, making the asana more powerful, making the pranayama more powerful.
Yeah. You can actually do asana without a mat.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. There's some postures I wouldn't do without a mat, but
yeah, absolutely.
because we're doing it 24/7.
You're in some posture.
Yeah, you're in some posture, and it's usually you're slumped in front of the television, or I guess in front of your phone.
Yeah, your neck is becoming.
But that is actually just bad alignment in your asana. But the idea that you can have small moments of practice, even out on the street, or if you're, just say you're at your work, if you can get grounded very quickly in order to, if you notice, anxiety in yourself, or if you notice, oh, maybe I can help that person or those people. You can do like a practice of maybe just 1 or 2 minutes, or 3 or 4 minutes, and get grounded. And I was just thinking of in the medical world, there's what a challenging job. I mean, but even in places where there's no war happening, or earthquake, or natural disasters, just where people are at the end of life, or they're afraid, and so it's so much for the professionals who are taking care, and if they can become grounded, they won't be swept away and washed away by either the complexities of the system itself, or the
Situation.
Yeah, the sense of sadness that is overwhelming.
Yeah. And so it's just starting anew over and over. And so we look at, well, what really then, and maybe if we turn a little bit more specifically to asana, because many of us who've tuned in, that was our doorway, or that's the one we're focusing on now. But what really does define a healthy practice, and looking at it physically, what is physically healthy, what is mentally and emotionally and interpersonally healthy, but in particular with asana, it's like physically healthy. How does an asana feel when it is healthy, and how does it change under circumstances, over time? Those are the big questions. And one of the things we often talk about is that it really, every asana that you do is a composite of complementary opposite patterns. Complementary opposite patterns of alignment and form and movement and breath, but also complementary patterns of mind.
Yeah, of one, perception of the posture itself. Oh, my knee is doing this, or,
Yeah.
or that feels wonderful, or that doesn't feel good. And then just that formulation influences the breath, the prana. And then you can actually jiggle or introduce a counter action or a counter thought, and that will also allow you to feel the sensation itself rather than getting lost in the theory of the sensation. And and so action, counteraction, and eventually thought and counter thought. So you see some kind of predictable pattern in your mind as you, oh, I got into that, and you're going off on some story about that. And that's natural. In fact, that's what minds do. In fact, you might be dead if your mind doesn't do that. But then you see it or you watch it, and the way to see it is through the not grasping it, but the introduction of counteraction. And counteraction, then we think, well, then we grasp on for years to the counteraction. So you tend to do everything backwards. So I'm going to rotate to the left rather than to the right. No, but then you have to have a counteraction and a counteraction. And this way there's a vibration, and that's just and even the word vibration, I have to create a counter definition to the word vibration, but it lets you go, and all of a sudden it's like, I like the word fizzing, and it's like there's a release of the whole thing. And this is true in terms of your emotions as you practice, in terms of your theories about the practice, particularly about emotions when they come up.
And the physical aspects of it.
Yeah.
And noticing, so the healthy part is when we start to really be able to notice the cues in the body, in the physical body, in the, in our emotions or in our hearts, and in our mental thinking, and the cues we're getting from the breath patterns where we're holding or running into resistance or kind of grasping onto things. That in terms of a healthy practice, whether you're doing the most extreme back bend there is, or you finally got both feet behind your head and their feet are sticking out by your ribs here in some unknown posture, that even at that point there is this feeling of freedom and this feeling of non-clinging and non-grasping that we go for. And so really, as you practice, to notice, to interject that into the asana, like at moments where you have, just the mind happens to fall upon it, to say, well, what am I doing that's action, counteraction, physically, etc. And that you just pay attention. And then, remarkably, the body, when you stop the resistance or stop the pushing, the body automatically knows what to do. And so there's this, that's the fizz, that's the release that happens. It automatically, just like it spills off the mat, when it automatically spills into your experience.
Yeah, that the whole world is fizz.
Yeah. Let me write that down.
Yeah. And that's the depth of it. Every phenomenon, every thing, whether big or small, has as its background, it has an immediate background, practically, and then it has a deeper background. And that background is everything. And so it's natural.
Yeah.
And even our formulations, we look at them also. And so in this way, we don't become, occasionally when this happens, we are able to use our religious nature, which everyone has, meaning that's how you focus your mind. And we all have, some of us have unique religions, and others, have bought the party line, different places in the world. But even that is amazing.
Yeah.
And you can't live with it, you can't live without it. And so the idea is just to look.
Yeah.
And look being a metaphor for perceive or listen. And in the Indian tradition, a lot of times, rather than saying, oh, look again, although they use that all the time, look at what's in front of your eyes, but they love to use hear, listen, and nada.
And that's this,
Yes.
aspect of the abhyasa and vairagya, where you make the effort and then you let it be, but then you don't just stop with that. It's this pattern that continues. And as we go into that abhyasa vairagya, the effort and the release within the practice, and we feel those moments of freedom and feel the moments of restraint and constraint, then some sort of wisdom starts to happen. And what many of us experience in asana, and it's true in pranayama, and I've experienced in meditation as well, where you get your program set, you got it figured out, and it's exciting at first, and you have this abhyasa vairagya thing going on, and then it kind of plateaus, and it can plateau for 6 months, it can plateau for 10 years, until something comes along and starts to wake it back up. And the perception that, it plateaued in terms of which poses I'm doing is one way of looking at it. But also, as we get older and our asana shifts due to circumstances and physical changes in the body, it plateaus, and then it deepens in terms of insight into what we said in the beginning, that all of these forms of practice really are tied intimately into the idea of what are the 8 limbs of Ashtanga Yoga, or the 15 limbs, and how does this practice really truly benefit me and others rather than just me. And that sort of perspective starts to come in often when we have difficult circumstances that arise, either an injury within the yoga, or having a car accident, or aging, shall we admit that, that really starts to say, there's this moment, like when you have a bad accident or where you start to age, where you think, well, no, not me, I'm going to fight that till the end. And then you realize, wait a minute, where is this freedom that drew me in? And just like in a relationship with a human being, what's the seed of this other human? What's the seed of this practice that I fell in love with? And how have I, through blinders and kind of sort of dullness within me, how have I made things become stuck? And how can I see that seed of the practice that changed my life and bring it into the life that my life has changed into, and continue to deepen with it? And this takes incredible
at times courage.
Yeah.
Because you're facing the unknown. And it takes also, an interesting thing I was thinking of, the classic 8 limbs, and it starts out with the yamas, niyamas, and then it goes all the way to samadhi, and then of course I'm starting with samadhi, but what happens is that the more you practice and you start, even entertaining samadhi. So you usually entertain it, conceptually, and then, but that keeps, it almost flashes or trickles back immediately to the yamas, and the first of the yamas is ahimsa, which not to harm, but it has to do everything with relationships, to all being, including
Yourself.
If even though you're not quite sure
What that is.
yeah, who is that self, but and it's just like being nice and interconnecting, and it's
And so, to be specific, in terms of one's own asana practice, we really encourage you to approach each practice as a brand new opportunity, a brand new experience. And just like when you have a meal, you often, or at least for me, I don't compare it to every single other meal I've had. It's just like, what's on the plate in front of me now? Is this healthy? Does it feel good, taste good going down, etc. And later. So we approach the practice new each time we do it with kind of a, and it's a little bit of a, sort of overused phrase, but with a beginner's mind, with a beginner's attitude. And in that space, there is room for self-honesty, because you have the safety of the training of having practiced for a long time. So the nervous system is on board to know when things are stable or less stable, etc. And then you have the ability to, in the mind, say, well, what is my motive for practice? And am I really, truly feeling good? When you've had an injury, if you try to go too far in one direction, you can re-injure it. So you find that edge of sensation, like in an injury. Let's say it hurts to twist this way because you fell on your side or something. You can still twist that way, and then the absolute honesty of, if I twist this much more, there's pain. If I back out here, there's not the pain. And the breath, the fascia, the body, the mind can adjust to that part of the body, which is actually how we navigate relationships in the world as well, little by little, finding the edge, not going over the edge, but also not being presumptuous and staying too far away from it.
Yeah, practically you have to know where the edge is.
Yeah.
Otherwise
Yeah.
you're hibernating, which is,
And so we often say that a practice is healthy if you feel happier, if you feel more generous, if you feel nicer, if you feel and act in ways that are more kind and compassionate, then that's a sign that the practice is healthy. And in the Ashtanga practice, a really important part that allows that sort of thing to arise, this feeling of caring about other people and also assimilating the goodness from the practice, is that we allow for ample time for finishing postures, for the body to calm back down, for the mind to settle back into the heart, and for the nervous system to settle out. And so we really encourage you, in terms of keeping a healthy practice going, that you make sure you do good, long finishing postures, which means maybe a quarter of the time that you're practicing in any given practice, at least is devoted to the calming of the nervous system through these rather than increasingly bringing the energy up and twisting and getting stronger.
Yeah.
And that's how it will be healthy for a long time, and sustain you over decades rather than just right here, right now.
Yeah. And then sometimes the finishing postures can be your main practice.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say the corpse pose. That's coming.
That's coming.
But really, the idea of in the finishing postures of really going internally and finding the central channel, finding the breath, and because one of the axioms of the yoga is that everything the mind does corresponds to patterns in the prana, which are felt throughout the body. And we tend to ignore the actual sensations within the body. And those sensations we would call prana or breath. So breath is the way to access them. And that's really the way to start over. So even if you're, going for the,
Gold.
going for the gold, which is normal. I mean, stay with the breath as you do that, because and that's the actual practice, and that can be done even, in all kinds of circumstances. You can, if you're still breathing, you can just go. Oh, you can feel it, and then that will improve the alignment or the asana, and will help you go, And so it's back to the breath. But then, if you make a definition of the breath, you probably are ignoring what's actually happening in the breath. And that's, the asana helps you with that. So there's plenty to do.
And the breath really is, where, from my limited experience, how we start playing with a deeper form of mula bandha is through awareness of breath, through awareness of the physical patterns in the pelvic floor, and then those reflected throughout the body. Maybe we could close it up with actually doing that chant.
Well, doing that, Jim?
Would you do that?
I'll try. Let's see. All right, okay. Touch it a couple of times. So, sounds like this. Yan mula sarvabhutanam, yan mula chitta bandhanam, mula bandha sada sevyo, yogyaso raja yoginam. Yan mula sarvabhutanam, yan mula chitta bandhanam, mula bandha sada sevyo, yogyaso raja yoginam. The mula.
Thank you, everyone.